Hi, this is Brian Birdwell, and welcome to Verbal Session 4, Mixed Vocab Drill. So the object for this part of the lesson is to do a drill involving both text completion problems and sentence equivalence problems in random order, mixed up, much like you'll see on the real GRE. I'd like to begin the exercise by first examining the answer choices from 3 sentence equivalence problems. As you remember, there are 2 correct answer choices for every sentence equivalence problem, and the answer choices can be identified often by being the lone pair of words within choices. More often, there will be 2 pairs of words and 2 unrelated words, and one of the pairs is correct. So knowing that, what I'd like you to do is take a minute to analyze each of these 3 choices and find as many word pairs as you can. Ready? And begin. And if you need additional time, just pause the recording and work through it, and then start the recording again. Okay, let's look at these. Actually, we kind of played a mean trick on you with these answer choices because most likely what you're going to encounter is 2 pairs of words and 2 unrelated words in every set of choices. In this exercise, since the exercise was finding pairs, there are actually 3 pairs of words in each set of choices. In the first one, we have doff, which you should remember from the vocab list, and remove, very near synonyms. Of course, doff, kind of an archaic word. The only current usage I can think of is to doff your hat or to doff your cap, to say hi to a lady or something. Also, mitigate and palliate, both very nearly meaning the same thing. To make less severe, of course. Palliate more often used in a medical circumstance, and mitigate more often used perhaps in a common or even a legal circumstance. Condone and brook, the other pair here, the third pair. Moving on to the second set. In the second set of words, we have a couple of choices here that may seem to be pairs, kind of confusing. Many people put apt and pertinent together, but it turns out that in other circumstances, maybe apt and pertinent would be somewhat related, more of a pair. But given the circumstance of these choices, the best pair is germane and pertinent, which are very near synonyms, and apt and apposite are much nearer synonyms than apt and pertinent in this regard. Each of them sort of meaning appropriate. Squalid and foul, I think, are the more obvious pair there, both of those bad things. On the final example here, we have circumscribed and delimited, the third pair, kind of the hidden pair there that many people don't see, which both involve boundaries. In fact, in this one, they both involve determining boundaries. To delimit or circumscribe is to determine a boundary. Restive and skittish are another pair here, and restive is kind of an interesting word because it doesn't mean restful. In fact, restive is exactly the opposite of resting. Restive means sort of nervous, a nervous energy. Easily spooked, antsy, which is exactly what skittish means. Unseemly and boorish. Now, unseemly is kind of an old school word derived from seemly conduct or seemly behavior, sort of in accordance with societal norms, whereas unseemly is odd behavior. Or inappropriate behavior. Boorish more nearly means sort of rude. So boorish is a more extreme or a cruder word than unseemly is, but they're very neatly paired in this set of answer choices to both mean inappropriate behavior of some kind. Okay, let's move on to our first problem of the day. And I'll go ahead and give you a minute to proceed through this one. Be sure you're using good process here. Identify the target, clues, pivots, come up with a good fill-in, and go through your process of elimination. Okay, 1 minute beginning now. Now, having been through the first 3 sessions, you should be familiar with this pattern by now. Not merely frugal, but positively really frugal. Now, remember that the positive here doesn't mean positive in the good sense, that positively simply means extremely. Not frugal, but extremely. So we could say extremely frugal, you could say cheap, you could say stingy. And what is the clue here? That he's so frugal, he's denying his children the smallest of affordable luxuries. What a Scrooge. And when we get to the choices, we have miserly and stingy. So some of us may have actually written stingy as our fill-in word, which was always fun when you write a fill-in that is correct and appears in the answer choices. Miserly, being like a miser. Other choices I think here that are appealing to some students are lucrative and thrifty. So very important that thrifty, miserly, and stingy are very nearly a false triple. That thrifty also means to save money. It does mean to be frugal in a sense, but it doesn't carry the extreme negative connotation that miserly and stingy do. So if you identify this as a triple, then your job is that much easier because you don't even have to consider lucrative, pedantic, or provident. Okay, moving forward, let's take a minute for this one. I love this example because of the sweet, short, and simple fill-ins that we can use. So if it's unclear whether the medicine will live up to its promise, okay, why? Why is that unclear? It's a promising medicine, but there's some aspect creating murky predictions for it. And here we have for while, and while is such an important word. So it's unclear whether it will live up to his promise. Why? While its overall effect may be something, recent studies have reported it to affect the nervous system of some patients. So this some patients and the effect it's having there is what's bringing sort of a lack of clarity to the medicine's overall effect or promise. So we can get away here with the simple fill-in words of good and bad. And I love it when a fill-in can be this simple and still lead us to the correct answer. So while the overall effect may be good, which one of these means good in a healthful way? Well, there's only one choice. If you've been doing your weekly vocab list, you'll recognize this one. And what is bad? Well, it has the word delete in it. So dramatic is too neutral. That's not very specific. Dramatic could go either way. It could be good or bad. Pharmacological is a theme trap. So extra points if you recognize that theme trap and avoided it. We need judgments here, good and bad. All right, 1 minute beginning now. Okay, now we're warming up. This is a bit of a tougher problem, I think. In part because of the language, and in part just because of what's missing from the sentence can make it quite difficult to understand exactly what is wanted here. It really helps if you have a sharp command of the word provenance, if you know that the word provenance is the origin. So some of the founding fathers did something. We could quickly glance at the first three choices if we wanted to know what part of speech this word was. It's a verb. Okay, great. Now look away again. Don't look at the choices anymore. So we need a verb that they did something to the origin or in regards to the origin of the natural rights. Okay, so what can founding fathers do with the origin of natural rights? They could mostly, I think about it. And you might be sort of scratching your head, and it would be important here to keep up the momentum and move on to the second blank if the first blank is too challenging. So we might be like, what can we do to the origin of the natural rights? Okay, so let's move on. Past the semicolon, pivot goes in the same direction. Others, okay, so we got some of the founding fathers are doing one thing with the origin of the natural rights, and others are doing something different with the origin of natural rights. And we can actually see that there's some nice parallelism here in the structure of this sentence, that some of the founding fathers, is concerning the origin of natural rights to lie with the divine, to blank with the social contract. So we have the exact same parallel grammatical structure here. So therefore, we could put lie with in there because we know this is correct. Some, and what would we say for the first blank? I think thought is probably the best fill-in I could come up with because it's so non-specific that what else could they do with such an abstract idea but think it, say it, posit it maybe? Thought that the origin of the natural rights lied with the divine, others to lie with the social contract. Now, there's going to be some difficulty when we understand what does lie with really mean in this context. Well, when we eliminate words based on simply this idea that the founding fathers thought the provenance lied with the divine, imparted is too strong. Imparting, you can't impart an origin. I can't substantiate the provenance of natural rights to lie with the divine. This is just improper grammar. It's bad to say substantiate the origin to the divine. I can't substantiate to something. I can think that something lies with the divine, but I can't really prove that or support that in the same way. So considered is our best match here. Some considered the provenance of natural rights to lie with the divine. Others considered the provenance of the natural rights to lie with the social contract. And what do we mean by lie with here? Some people say it's divine, some people say the social contract. We don't mean interact with, and it's certainly not give rise to, though if I were having difficulty on this problem, I would at least get it down to one of these two, because these are sort of opposites. One says give rise to, and the other is proceed from. So then it's just a question of direction. Is the provenance of natural rights coming from the social contract or giving birth to the social contract? Well, the question is, what were they saying in the first part of the sentence? Was the provenance of natural rights coming from the divine or creating the divine? And clearly it's coming from the divine, which gives us the same parallel meaning in the back half of the sentence, proceed from. Tough question there. All right, moving on. 1 minute for this one. Okay, this problem might come as a welcome relief after working the last one. Possessed of only something means. What kind of means? Well, the kind of means where they could not afford to educate all of the children. So if you cannot afford to educate the children, you don't have much means. Means here meaning financial power, wealth, money. So we could say something like meager, for example. Possessed of only meager or small means, we could not afford education. And the two nearest matches to meager are, of course, limited and modest. Notice that the word humble could also have worked in this context. And some people feel that tight-fisted is appealing. The biggest problem with tight-fisted is that this is very negative on the one hand, that we don't have a negative spin here. It's just simply the way this family is. Tight-fisted is more like a greedy and stingy. The other thing is that you can be tight-fisted with your means, withholding your money, but you cannot possess tight-fisted means. It doesn't work as an adjective to describe means. It only works as a way to describe you in relationship to your means. So grammatically, tight-fisted doesn't work here, as well as being of too negative of a spin for us to use here. Okay, moving along. All right, I'm curious which blank you started with here for filling in and eliminating. A blank approach sometimes taught to novice salespeople. No clue. We have really no information here regarding what we should put in the first blank, but we have a pivot. Okay. Many customers are blanked by any overture that hints of audacity or smugness. And here we have our first real clue into how this sentence is unfolding, that smugness is a bad thing. This is a negative. So what effect is smugness going to have on customers? Well, they're not going to like it. That's a bad thing. We have a negative spin here. So we could say customers may be alarmed, though that may be a little extreme, turned off, skeptical, of any overture. Notice overture here, not in the musical sense, but overture in terms of sort of a presentation of the salesman, or an offer from the salesman, something like this. So customers are going to be turned off by something negative, like smugness. So now we can look back at that other blank. So a blank approach is sometimes taught to novice salespeople, but many customers are turned off by an overture that hints of audacity or smugness. So we know that this pivot needs to go in the opposite direction, the different direction than the first part of the sentence. So many customers are turned off by this, but some salespeople are taught this kind of method. So therefore, we could just recycle words from the blank, and we could say something along the lines of, an audacious or smug approach is sometimes taught to novice salespeople, but many customers are turned off by this. And now we're well on our way to our correct answers here. What most nearly means smug, or in other words, an unlikable approach in the novice salespeople, and that's certainly not charismatic. Burgeoning doesn't get there. Presumptive is our best match. Your presumptive approach, however, that can make one appear smug. So we don't want to turn off the customers by appearing smug. On the other end, beguiled doesn't mean turned off. Bowled over, it's not like this smug approach is knocking customers down on the ground or something. So even if you don't know the word piqued, it's a good guess here in this instance if you do know beguile from your vocab list and you know what bowled over means. Piqued is kind of an interesting word. In the sense that in its transitive form, in other words, in its sort of more active form, you can pique my interest or you can pique my curiosity. It sort of means to stimulate my interest. Oh, you told me about this new restaurant. You've piqued my interest in their lasagna dish or whatever it may be. Piqued sort of intransitive here means stimulating in an annoying sense. So you've piqued me actually means that you have annoyed me, and thus a good match for turned off. Smugness can annoy customers or irritate them. Okay, 1 minute for this one. Another great example here of recycling, I think. I'm curious what you guys put in the blank. He lost the primaries and he tried to trade his endorsement of the front runner for a vice presidential slot, regarded as a galling act of, well, there's not a lot of clue to go on here, but I do know that whatever the act was, it was galling. Therefore, I can say this was a galling act of gall. and look for the word in the choices that most nearly means gall. Remember, this is obviously a text completion problem, only one correct answer choice here. And that answer choice is effrontery, which is an interesting word in the sense that I think we use this now in at least in contemporary America as, why you frontin'? Why you gotta be frontin'? It's kind of a funny term, but it means being abrasive, getting in someone's face, being galling, doing something bold, temerarious, which comes from the word temerity, sort of a surprisingly bold and kind of an aggressive way. None of the other answer choices really get there. Antagonism is a negative thing, so it's sort of antagonism is appealing because of its spin, but we really don't know that he's antagonizing anyone. He was just galling. People were so surprised. I can't believe he had the gall to try to be vice president after he lost the primaries. This is sort of where people have just like dismay, almost. I can't believe he did that. Artlessness, histrionics, artifice, none of those will really come close. How about a minute for this one? First one today with 3 blanks. So despite the fact that this one has 3 blanks, with some clever rephrasing or some clever recycling, and really looking into the structure of it, I think it becomes much easier. We ought not blank our leaders. No clue there. What are we supposed to do to the leaders or not do to the leaders? This is the question we'll look for a clue to answer later. Semicolon, pivot in the same direction. It is our flaws and blanks that make us human. Okay, now here is where I could think of creative, words. There's lots of choices available for things that make us human. It is our flaws and thumbs that make us human. It is our flaws and brains that make us human. However, neither of these really fit the meaning of the sentence, and in order to really get what the author is going for here, a safe bet is flaws. Our author believes that flaws make us human. So let me just recycle that because there's really no synonym for it that I can think of off the top of my head. There's not an obvious pair like peanut butter and jelly, flaws and, lungs. I can't really think of anything there. I guess lungs don't really distinguish humans. But anyway, I know that flaws works, so I'm going to recycle that word and look for something similar to flaws in the answer choices. Now let's keep moving. Only by humanizing the greatest among us. Oh, okay. So our flaws that make us human, and only by humanizing the greatest among us. Greatest among us is a pretty good match for leaders. I think they're talking about the same kinds of people here. When they say leaders and greatest among us, this is the same group of people that the author is describing. Therefore, if my author is telling me that I should humanize them, let me look back at that first blank. If I should humanize the greatest leaders, what should I not do to them? Interesting. I don't know. Whatever the opposite of humanize is, I should not do the opposite of humanizing these leaders because it's our flaws and our flaws that make us human. Only by humanizing the greatest among us, or those leaders, can we fully understand those whose achievements well, okay, again, who are we talking about? Who is it that we want to understand? Who do we want to humanize? Leaders. So what do we do to leaders' achievements? Oh, well, we admire them, we value them, we like them. And with these three fill ins, we can do a lot of great work in the choices. Because remember, we only have three choices per blank. So the elimination is a lot easier in 2 and 3 blank text completion problems. And then we get to the answer choices, and it's deify. That's what the opposite of humanize is. Not make them human, but make them God. Flaws and foibles is a simple synonym for flaws, especially within people. Personal weaknesses is like a foible. And those whose achievements that we value, admire, that we look up to because they're leaders, they're the greatest among us. This is the best match here. Moving on. Oh, doesn't this just sound awful? This one? The school's production was an absolute blank of an Earth Day celebration with student leaders erroneously citing the cause of global warming. So, what kind of Earth Day celebration is it if people are mistakenly attributing causes of global warming and leaving behind hundreds of pounds of trash? What kind of Earth Day celebration is that? Well, Earth Day is supposed to be a celebration of the earth, environmentalism, recycling, reducing waste, etc. So, a great fill in word here would be something like an absolute mockery, an absolute joke of an Earth Day celebration. And the best matches we have for mockery or joke are travesty and burlesque. Now, cacophony and din are a couple of paired words here, and they both mean sort of a chaotic noise, profusion. There's nothing chaotic here. You might be in there with, oh, okay, attendees are leaving behind hundreds of pounds of trash. Well, that sounds like a monster of a party. That sounds chaotic. But that would be reading a lot into this and going beyond the necessitated, I should say, meaning, the necessary meaning for the blank to have, that it's not a good Earth Day celebration. It's something else. It's a satire. It's a mockery. It's a joke. Travesty and a burlesque. Now, burlesque is sort of an entertainment form or a dance form that's really making, I think, a comeback in the last several years. I have lots of friends who dance in burlesque or play in the bands that accompany burlesque, and we sort of think of, I think, busty women dancing in a line or something like that on stage. But the old vaudeville burlesque was actually more of political commentary and sort of caricature. So this is a certain sense of that word burlesque being used here. Okay, 1 minute beginning now. This one, a very simple example of recycling. Travelers must always be careful. Same direction here. What is polite in one culture can be the height of, I think the most natural fill in here is simply impoliteness in another. So it's polite in one culture, impolite in another. That's the sort of twist or distinction that's being called to here. So, what means impoliteness? And the best answer is boorishness. Ebullience, meaning sort of expressive, lively energy for life. Prudery, sort of closely related in some ways to impoliteness, but prudery more like sort of like a promiscuous connotation to it. And there's something here about promiscuous. We're talking about the opposite here of polite. Seemliness would actually be politeness. So if we didn't pick up on the pivot that's required here, what is polite in one culture can be the height of politeness in another, then seemliness would be a good choice. And Sangfreud, a really great word to know. I think it just means cool-headed, calm under pressure. So a great word. You can use that word 3 times this week to describe your partner or your coworkers. And you may sound kind of nerdy, but you'll be using a word which, as we discussed in session 1, is so important. To really own your vocabulary, you have to risk sounding like a total dork and use the words in everyday use. Just use the word 3 or 4 times, and it's probably yours for life, just as we talked about in session 1. Okay, that concludes the vocab quiz. Thank you very much.